Hello, and welcome to the Responsive Family Sleep Podcast. I'm your host, Kim Hawley, holistic sleep coach, lactation consultant, peaceful parenting educator, and mom. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by all the conflicting sleep info, frustrated with sleep information that just plain felt wrong, or searched desperately for a truly gentle and responsive sleep approach, then you are in the right place. In each episode, we'll be answering your most pressing baby and toddler sleep questions, busting those sleep myths, and helping you understand truly developmental, biologically normal baby and toddler sleep, plus encouraging you to trust your intuition along the way. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome back to the podcast. I am so excited for this topic. It feels kind of overdue. I realized as we were prepping to hop on today that I don't know that I've done an episode directly on attachment, which is today's topic. And I'm super excited to have my good friend and sleep coach colleague, Heather Boyd, here with us to talk about attachment, because attachment is a better in conversation. So Heather, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's a pleasure. I'm so looking forward to this chat. And yeah, it is a long overdue conversation. I keep thinking I'll do it on my podcast too, and I haven't gotten around to it. So the fact that we're talking about it today is like, yay, finally.
I know. And for those of you who've been listening a while, Heather's been on my podcast before last winter to talk about sensory and sleep. And I remember then I was like, attachment or sensory, attachment or sensory. What should we talk about? I want to do them both. So here we are, finally getting to do them both. So
Yay. Yeah, we flipped a
yay.
coin the last time. So
I think we really did something
I
like that.
think
We're
we
like,
did.
what are we doing? So Heather, for those of you who are not familiar with your work, do you want to just give a, quick little overview of, what sort of how your work with sleep and kind of what you bring to the work that you do
Sure.
with families, and then we'll jump into attachment.
Sure. And we're such good colleagues in the sleep world because we practice through the same lens, very attachment
Yes.
based, holistic lens. I am an occupational therapist in Ontario, in Niagara, Canada. And I've been practicing for almost 25 years as an OT, always with infants. It's always been 0 to 3. And I've been working in sleep since I'm going to lose track. I think 6 years, maybe more. Time has a funny way of pitter pattering along. But yes, I work with families mainly in Ontario who are looking for alternatives to sleep training. So my background as an OT has helped me a lot because I am interested in the sensory piece and how the senses help support development and help support sleep. So that's me in a nutshell. I'm also a mom of 3. So that has been my real education, is learning about 3 very different sleep personalities and temperaments and sleep needs with my own boys. That has helped me be a better coach for the families that I support.
I know our kids teach us so much, don't they?
They do. They do.
Yeah, I often say when I'm thinking about who's the most similar of all the sleep coaches I know to me in the way that I work, I always come back to you.
Yeah. Likewise, Kim. Likewise. Yeah. And
I'm like,
it's always
Heather's
so
me with the
neat.
OT lens, and I'm you with the lactation
Exactly.
lens.
Exactly. I'm like, okay, the feeding piece. We get to layer in the feeding piece whenever I talk to you. So,
Awesome. So attachment, it is a huge topic. We were joking before we hit record, like, oh my God, this is so huge, but reminding ourselves, both of us, that we're not giving a masterclass on attachment today. But I just want to highlight that it is such a huge, deep, and important topic. And so, when we're thinking about understanding attachment, I think it's helpful just to start with the basics
mhm.
and, you know, what is important when we're thinking about attachment. What do you say, Heather, when you're talking
Right.
to parents?
Gosh. Well, and it's interesting because almost everyone that reaches out to me already knows that they want things through an attachment lens. But I wonder if I actually ask them what they would say that means. And I think for me, at the essence, it's looking at what is our innate need as human beings for connection, safety, and security. And not
Yes.
safety as in like literal, are you in a physically safe space, but do you feel safe with the people that you're with, with the environment that you're in, pulling in all that we know about the emotional part of our brain and how much as human beings, and already I'm going deep already, Kim, but I think about the importance of community and the importance of connection for babies, for adults, for human beings in general, in order to survive and thrive. And it's through that connection and that attachment that allows us to do that. And it allows us to do, I think, so much of everything. When we are stressed or anxious, or our babies are stressed or anxious, we can't learn as well. When we're worried about whether we're safe enough or being cared for, we can't grow, we can't develop, we can't learn, we can't connect as well. And so it really does, for me, feel like a ripple effect through every possible thing that you could think that we need or want to do as human beings.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that's a lot how I think of it as well, as this relational, right? Connection, um, and the safety and security. I talk about that a lot. I feel like I talk about attachment most when I'm teaching my newborn sleep class. I don't feel like I talk about it as much with some of the families I work with. I get a good mix of families who like absolutely know they want something that's attachment based, but then ones that like intuitively know they want something attachment based, but they don't know the words yet. They don't have the words yet. They're purely instinctually knowing they want something different. And so with them, we'll talk about, why does responsiveness matter? Why is connection so important? But I think we forget how much we're social beings and how much relationship and connection, like a safe, secure relationship is at the heart of all that we do as parents. And I mean, all that we do as humans being, interconnected.
Yeah. Well, and you're talking about the newborn piece, and I jump ahead to like the toddler and preschool stage too, where that's where parents, if they've managed to balance out this push in our society for independence, and they've managed to kind of reframe that for the first couple of years, often it's the toddler and preschool stage that parents are like, okay, now I'm supposed to push independence,
Uh-huh.
right? And then we end up, I always talk to parents about keeping alarm under the radar, like doing things that meet our babies and toddlers and preschoolers' basic needs without triggering this alarm of separation or feelings of unsafety, and how important it is beyond that newborn stage to keep that sense of safety, even though it looks different. Because I know by the time you get to the preschool stage, there is an unfolding of development that does lead to more independence. But that unfolding happens best when that attachment need is met, so that kids are the ones pushing off in a way rather than us trying to like push that independence.
I love that. Just that when we are the ones pushing, we can so easily set off that alarm, that
Mm-hmm.
stress, that fear, that disconnection. And when we are the ones creating that foundation of attachment, of connection, and they are the ones sort of growing and pushing, then
Mm-hmm.
that's when independence unfolds, in a more developmentally appropriate and individually appropriate timeline,
Yeah.
to their needs.
Well, and ironically, I feel like it's our fear as parents too that leads to
Yes.
that pushing. We
Oh
start
my
getting
gosh,
afraid
yes.
that if we don't do it, it's not going to happen. Whatever it is, like fill in the blank, bed sharing or their own room or weaning or
Yes.
sleeping through the night. If we don't do it, it's not going to happen. And so we get fearful, and it changes the way that we behave through that attachment lens. And then our babies, that alarm gets triggered, and they clamor for that connection. They're always going to seek it if it's not there to be met.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I love this idea that we culturally frame independence in a way that it is something we have to push and teach and rush to, like the cultural view.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, when you really turn away from that and look at it from this developmental and attachment view, it's more about creating this abundant foundation of connection and security and safety I'm just letting that independence kind of blossom at its own rate, with
Yeah.
appropriate scaffolding at points, right? It's not like we're holding them back. Um,
No, no.
but when we're pushing hard, and especially for definitely, for creating stress, then that's not healthy independence. That's not doing what we want to do in the long term.
Yes. Yeah. I always picture an elastic kind of connecting our kiddos. And as development unfolds, that elastic gets longer. But if we stretch it or pull away or tug on it, our kids feel that and they
Hmm.
want to relieve that pressure of that tugging. So they come closer in not just physically, but in so many ways that is fine. But we can also just let it unfold, let that elastic, that attachment string get longer over time.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Pushing harder can definitely backfire, right? Like we
Mhm.
want to create that more separation, but we can't create that more separation if we're also creating stress and alarm because it's just going to have them holding on tighter to seek, that emotional closeness.
Yeah. And I always think as a parent myself, I think what helped me most in wrapping my head around that is knowing that even if I knew where I wanted things to go with independence or with their skills or whatever, it's almost never an emergency. And I can't
Hmm.
get us to point B by driving really fast. There's still a speed limit. This takes time. I can go one step at a time. There's that first pit stop is the first step, not trying to get to the end point and race through it because that's when that alarm is going to get triggered and you end up not getting where you need to go, even just in terms of having a balance of what your kids are capable of doing on their own. Um, moving away from contact naps or whatever else is making it
Hmm.
difficult to parent in that particular sense. And yeah, it takes longer to get there in the end.
Yeah. And hitting up against the limit doesn't mean that limit's always going to be there as far as like a baby's capacity. I talk about
Mm-hmm.
this a lot with families when, they have a really high touch needs kiddo and they want totally separate sleep. And it's like, that's fine, but that can be a long-term goal for some littles, right? Whereas other littles, we put the right conditions in place and they can make that shift more easily. And there's just a level of the capacity of your child, and how much physical closeness is part of that emotional closeness and safety for them, at that
Mm-hmm.
point.
Yeah, that makes me think of something I say to parents often, which is your baby's needs are there to be met, not changed. And we could
Hmm.
wish for an easier temperament or wish that things were different in this moment, but that doesn't mean we won't get there in the end. We can't change who our kids are and what their needs are in this moment.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to bring in the idea of stages of attachment from Dr. Neufeld's work because I've known about attachment for a really long time. And his model of the stages of attachment was the first time I ever really saw, I guess, more of a developmental, I don't know if roadmap is the right word, but progression of how things shift over time, or at least a theory or a model for that. As far as our littles naturally become more independent and more separate from us, what does it look like to stay connected, right? As separation increases, how are they able to stay emotionally connected to us in increasingly complex ways? And so I think it's a really cool concept where people can kind of get stuck sometimes when you have a baby and like attachment, how is this ever gonna progress? Or no, or the independence piece, right? Like, how are we ever gonna get out of my baby needs me all the time? I think it's just such a lovely model
Well,
to
and you
show that
know that,
growth.
yeah, his work is such a cornerstone of the way that I think and I work and I parent. Like
Yes.
if
I
there were
love
a
his
fan
work. Yes.
club for for, for Neufeld, I think I'd be heading it up perhaps. Well,
Yes.
and just for perspective too. When I think back to my early parenting, I didn't, as much as I kind of was using attachment through my work with infant development, which was 0 to 3 kids that were at risk or had developmental challenges. When, as a parent, I didn't think about how that applied to sleep. I knew nothing about sleep, and I
Mm-hmm.
didn't really know that much about attachment theory. It was like attachment theory light. And I
Mm-hmm.
first heard about it with Dr. Sears, but it wasn't long before I felt like I was running into a bit of a challenge with how to parent through an attachment lens, because Dr. Sears, it felt like it was a checklist that, or rubrics that I had to follow.
A lot of people
And
feel that way. Yeah.
yeah, and I don't think that was his intention, but it became very much of a to-do list. And,
Mm-hmm.
how attachment parenting can you, or how much can you be attachment? How many tick boxes can you tick off without any understanding of why truly are those things even on the list? What's truly underlying the importance of what we're doing as parents? And so
Mm-hmm.
when I discovered Gordon Neufeld's model, and he loves gardening, so the model is based around planting, like doing planting a seed and watching it grow and focusing on the roots. And so when I discovered his model and then saw how it was literally unfolding in front of me with my eldest, who was 2 at the time, it felt almost like magic, because I was looking at this model. And of course, models are like the practical picture of how we can hold on to making sense of something. And so for him, that picture is a plant. And models are measured against how well they actually explain what's happening. And when I saw that it was explaining what was happening with my son and what he needed, and that it could actually kind of predict what was coming up. And the story that I have is I was talking to a Gordon Neufeld trained counselor, a psychologist, and she said to me, "Has your son started saying mine yet?" Like, we had a baby in the house as well, my second born. Is he saying my baby or my mom or my toy? I'm like, no, not yet. And she said, well, I think it's just around the corner. And within 2 weeks, quite spontaneously, the minds came. And I thought, oh, that's the route that he's on now with this attachment theory. And so for me, it really solidified that this model actually helps me not just look at parenting as a checklist of how many things can I do to make this attachment based, but how does this actually make sense, so that I'm not putting a fixed set of rules on this. I'm actually understanding my son better. And that's really the crux of this, right? There's not a grade that you get for doing this right. This is about how well can we understand what our babies need, so that we can meet that need most easily, so that they can grow and have their development unfold in the way that they're capable of for that capacity,
Absolutely.
right? And
Absolutely.
so when I think about this plant, and I'm from Niagara, so we have lots of fruit trees and orchards here. So I always picture an apple tree when I think about his model. And he talks about, when you want the fruit of the tree, right? Like, that's what we really want when we plant an apple seed and when we nurture a plant. The fruit is the last part. It's the part that comes at the end. And if we focus instead on nurturing the roots, and Gordon Neufeld has 6 roots, each of which kind of align to 1 year of age. So the first root is the first year about, and there's 6 of them. So it goes all the way up to as the child's approaching 6. And if we nurture the roots instead of the fruit will come. We got to trust that that's how it's going to unfold. And so
Mm-hmm.
I remind myself of that when I'm getting impatient with my own parenting, or what stage my kids are at, that the fruit takes a while to come, and it's the roots that we need to pay attention to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's recap or go over just those 6
Mm-hmm.
stages. And then I want to really focus in on the first 3, since I think that's where most families listening are going to be in that, first few
Yeah.
years. So let's go over each, just on a high level, each
Yeah.
stage.
So the first root, and it's the thickest and the most non-negotiable, is the senses. And for the
Mhm.
first year of life, or almost the first year, it's all about seeing, hearing, smelling, touching, moving with, like feeling the movement of the rocking, and even tasting, because when it comes to nursing, that's part of it. Being able to have all those sensory experiences with a baby's primary caregivers. And that can initially be the birthing parent. It extends gradually to to others in the family, partners, spouses, grandparents, other close family members. It slowly expands, but it really is about those senses. Then the second route, as we approach the first birthday, is sameness. And well, they're all exciting stages, but in sameness, that at this stage, that's when walking usually happens and talking. And so kids are capable of moving away from us towards more independence. And then the sameness comes in as a way for them to hold on to us, even as they're moving away from us in the room, or for many babies, spending time away from parents in daycare, and being able to hold on to us in a different way through sameness. And in fact, it's why it helps explain why language comes at this age, because babies will copy us and model our behavior, our sounds, our facial expressions, what we're doing. This is such a fun age for kids by, a year and a half to be helping feed the cat, because they can copy what we're doing. The third stage is belonging and loyalty. And this is that mind stage, right? So it's age 2. Everything becomes about babies really want to belong. They want to feel like they're part of the fabric of the family, right? They want to participate in things. It's about coming alongside with kids at this stage. And I'll try to keep it high level, because it'll be fun to go deep dive into those first 3.
Absolutely.
The fourth one is significance. And that's that feeling of being cherished or special. And it's about age 3. And I think about the things that happen at that age are much more about having their own room, or their own comforter, or their own things that are special to them, or even just their own special routines with you that help them feel significant within the family, right? And by 3, kids are doing so much more that they even have often some special roles that they have in the family, things that they're doing, special responsibilities.
Mm-hmm.
The 5th stage is when kids are about 4. And I should add a caveat that when Gordon Neufeld laid out these ages, this is when things are unfolding optimally. But it doesn't mean that those first roots or stages don't matter anymore. I think about, if I'm unwell or stressed, how nice a hug is, which is seeing, hearing, feeling, touching, moving with someone who cares for me so that I feel better. And so those earlier stages don't end, but these other stages add to. And if things are not optimal, through adoption or separation, or war or uncertainty, or big transitions for families, it can be helpful to back up to earlier steps and make sure, are we giving a really safe foundation for getting through these challenging times? But with that 5th stage, after my little sidetrack there, Kim, the 5th stage is love. And these are the 4-year-olds who start professing their undying love for you. And anyone that has a 4-year-old who has seen this unfold is the I love yous, I want to marry you. That intense, it's like the limbic system is just on fire with this love and connection that is both intensely strong and strong enough for them to actually articulate it, but it also is vulnerable, right?
Mm-hmm.
To have that tender heart to say just how big their love is for the people that are most important to them. And then the 6th stage is being known. And it's about really knowing that the people that are closest to you really know who you are. By this point, their temperaments are much more clear, their likes and dislikes, the things that they excel in and that they love to immerse themselves in are much more clear. And for those around a child to really know that child and who they are is the way that 5-year-olds and up would connect and feel attached. And I always describe that stage as the university sandwich stage, where university students that come home, they know how to make their own darn sandwich, but to feel so known that your parent makes you the sandwich that you love, that the egg salad sandwich or whatever it is, you're capable of making it, but your parent knows you so well that they're not even going to ask you if you want your sandwich. They're just going to make it for you and give it to you. And that's that being known stage. And that's all 6 of them in a nutshell.
I love it. And you can see, right, as the complexity, as babies to toddlers to preschoolers to whatever you call a 5-year-old. I guess they're technically still a preschooler. school
Yeah, I don't
age.
know.
They're right on the border. Anyway, um, as they grow and mature, there's more complexity with each of these stages, which I just think is a really fascinating way to help a brain that has a lot of societal pressure, saying like if you lean in to these early stages of sensory proximity, right? And like physical closeness, sensory stuff, and babies that are all about touch and being with, that we're going to get stuck there, right? That they're going to need this forever. And I just love this progression where you see, no, of course not. Like development is going to unfold, their needs are going to change, their capacity for separation and more independence is going to change, and the ways that we stay close and stay connected are going to change and become more complex as they grow and develop. And like you say it and it's like obvious, but also it's not, because of so many cultural narratives that are oversimplifying
Yeah.
and scaring parents about really seeing those needs and leaning into those needs.
Yeah, and thinking that they have to do something about this to make it
Mm-hmm.
happen. I had a parent the other day that was really getting worried about the contact naps and said, and has an older child that I also worked with her through. And she said, I just don't want sleep to be as hard this time. I don't want things to look the same way as it did the first time. And I said, he's a different kid. You couldn't hold back his development and his independence, even if you tried. It's going to unfold for him differently because he's unique, and you can't stop that from happening. That development, that urge, that push for independence when the attachment needs are met. I'll add underlined,
Mm-hmm.
asterisk to highlighted. When the attachment needs are met, you couldn't hold back that natural unfolding of independence and development, no matter how hard you tried.
Yeah, and I think along the same lines, like when I think of parents who are so worried that if they don't make the change, they're going to lose that opportunity. And then you introduce the idea that like for many littles, many of these asks that parents want around more independence are easier the older they get. And like you get that sleep training narrative that says the opposite. But when you
Mm-hmm.
look at this, you're like, we have so many more tools, right? To support a shift either happening organically because they are really ready, or if they're not quite there yet, but you really need this shift to happen, they're so much closer. And there's so many more tools to help them navigate that change in a much better place than if you are afraid,
Yeah.
and pushing
Yeah.
with a much younger baby.
Well, and to
Yeah.
put that back into this idea of the roots of the model, if you're trying to do something for which there's not a root for that plant yet, you're going to end up pulling it out of the soil. And if instead you continue to nurture the root that is there, like that first year being all the senses, and just focus on that, the second root will grow. It
Yeah.
will end up showing up, and then you can use that root too. And your understanding of that root is going to make it easier at that point in time.
Well, and I think it's so hard for American parents because our babies are in daycare for the most
Mm-hmm.
part in this first route, right? Like we don't
Mm-hmm.
have the parental leave that allows significant, you know, parental immediate interfamily caregiving for as long as would be,
Mm-hmm.
attachment need ideal. And it's tough because not only are you hoping that you can have the most attachment friendly childcare, which is hard, but you have so much less time to connect and yet also so much less time to do the other things that
All
adults
the
need to
other
do, like run a
things. Yeah.
household, right?
Get
And
food in
so,
the table.
yeah, clean up the kitchen, which, like, yes, you can let it slide here and there, but eventually, like, someone has to do the dishes, someone
Yeah.
has to prep meals.
Yeah.
And there's so many creative ways that, like, I know and I'm sure you help parents navigate these things when there's not enough time. But fundamentally, I think it's important to acknowledge for you as parents that like civilized countries give parents more time before
Mm-hmm.
they are juggling work with
Mm-hmm.
babies that are meant to be so much more in proximity with their primary caregivers. And I think that
Hmm.
S is really important, that this is not about it being 100% on the birthing parent. This is, if you carried the baby, obviously there's a little bit of a, I don't know, preference is the right word, but a little bit heavier weight to that parent initially, especially if you're also nursing or body feeding. But it is absolutely supposed to be a wider circle of, caregivers. And yet we just put parents in a really challenging place in this first year, I feel like in the
Yes,
US.
yeah. And I was thinking about that leading up to our interview, Kim, because here in Canada, the mat leave is quite generous.
I know, I
Quite
know.
generous. And I think, oh yeah,
So
again, you
jealous.
don't think about it till you think of the model, like this first root of senses, it is so physical. I think even in some of my earlier materials for families, I actually called that root proximity because it requires a certain level of closeness because babies can't hold us in their brains or
Hmm.
hearts without us there. We don't even exist. They don't even have object permanence yet. And so when we know the roots, it's not because Gordon Neufeld has a few amazing long-term people on his team who have worked a lot with military families, as an example, where separation is a huge part of that. They're
Yes.
gone
Oh,
for
deployments
not just a
so
day, but
hard.
months and months. And I think if they can approach that model, even for military families with that kind of separation, it's a reminder that this is not a checkbox. This is not, are you doing enough? Are you doing everything that you're supposed to? It's saying, if this is the root at this stage of their development, what are the ways that we can meet it, knowing that the senses are the primary way that they're attaching?
Yeah.
And it brings up the point you said about how this does mature and change over time. The maturation happens, the development happens, so that it becomes easier, so you can actually talk to your child about what something will look like. Infants aren't there, newborns aren't there yet,
Yeah.
but what can we do knowing that smell, touch, hearing you, seeing you are so important? What are ways to be able to give that to them freely when you are with them, instead of
Hmm.
getting stuck in the, yeah, but they need to be out of my room, or yeah, but
Yeah.
I don't, I've been told not to share sleep with them, or bed share, and instead think, well, what are the ways that I can lean in during the times that we are together that work
Yeah.
for everybody, that work
That feels
for the
sustainable.
family?
Yeah. And
Yeah,
doable.
that feels
Yep.
sustainable. And what are the ways that we can use scent or
Yes.
image? I mean, babies are so young for using pictures or anything like that, but scent is such a powerful tool that,
Hmm.
and I think of all the parents I've told, like, get a small blankie and stuff it down, or
Uh-huh.
sleep on their crib sheets. If they're not bed
Yes.
sharing or in your room, sleep on the crib sheets for a few nights and swap them out. So the one mom I was working with recently said, so you're like, she was calling it the dirty laundry. She said, it's not really dirty. It's just not clean. It's supposed to smell like me, right? And I'm like, yeah, like, don't
Yes.
clean the sheets. Don't put
Yes.
them through the wash if you're going to try this. And just how powerful that scent really
I
is.
I mean, a little breast milk on a sheet
Uh-huh.
is not a bad
Yes.
thing.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, I'm going to add that to yeah, my
Yeah.
recommendations. I hadn't thought about that. But yeah, there
Um,
is a family I was working with where the father was the one that had the best success around supporting baby to sleep most easily and with the least number of tears. And it just seemed to all work so well. And mom was trying to figure out what to do. And I shared all the information about the roots of attachment, but she's the one that came up with the idea that maybe she should just wear her husband's deodorant, and it worked.
um,
Now, I'm not suggesting that for everyone. I don't, it just, for this family, it worked. I thought,
I like
oh my
the
goodness,
I like the creative thinking
I
there.
loved it. Yeah, I loved that. That was really taking what we were talking about and then figuring out how does that work? Because that every family is so unique, that, and that's why I like the roots of attachment, is they don't assume anything about how your family works or what the circumstances are. It's
Hmm.
about understanding what is the root need here for attachment. And then from there, what's the best way to meet it for your
Yeah,
particular family?
absolutely. So for the first year, for the babies, or most of the first year, we have sensory proximity. And I actually like thinking of it in that way, honestly, because I think it really goes along with a lot of the evolutionary biology lenses and neuroscience lenses around their first year,
Yeah.
being
Yeah.
like a time of in arms. I like personally when we can layer the disciplines and see how they overlap. And when they really are overlapping, I think it's when we're really on to something, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when we can take developmental psychology and we can take neuroscience and we can take an evolutionary biology lens, and they're all basically saying the same thing,
Well, and to
then
me, it
like
also
that's important, right? Like that is powerful.
it is, and it highlights too that despite individual circumstances and uh, parental leave situation in the U.S., proximity, there's no real good replacement for the proximity piece. That the senses at this stage, because babies don't have object permanence and they can't hold you in their heads or their hearts when separated, is when you are together, that's when you're really able to lather up that sensory
Yeah.
root. And to know that means that you can figure out a way to lean into having them in arms, um, to look at the baby wearing if there's physical capacity to do that, and to keep them close at night, even if what you pictured was different, so that you're able to meet that sensory need.
And I think we can say, here's what I can do in the time that I'm with my baby. And these policies are not appropriate. And I'm doing a really great job at meeting my baby's needs within the system that I'm at, right? Like,
Yes,
especially, I mean, you
yes.
mentioned, military families, like deployments are not ideal in families. Like, no way, no
No.
how. Like, they happen and we need to make the best of them. But I don't think anyone would argue they're healthy for a
No,
family,
no,
right?
no.
Like, just like no one would argue that US lack of parental leave is healthy for a family, but it is the system that we're in. And
Mm-hmm.
there's so many things that you can do with this phase of attachment, within
Mm-hmm.
that system. Um,
Yes. Yeah. Look for
including
the
knowing
areas
that
that you
if
can.
you have the ability to take more time, take it. Because I don't think everyone always realizes that, like, sometimes you do have a choice. Like, so take more time if you can take more time. And if you can't take more time, then just really prioritize the time that you have in a way that feels sustainable because you don't want to
Yes.
burn anyone out or make
No,
anyone
no.
like tank anyone's mental health. That's not going to be helpful.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, do what, knowing what the root is, do what is workable within that route. And that, to me, that allows parents to shed some of the messaging around independence, because they can say,
mhm.
well, gosh, my baby's in daycare all day. I'm going to structure our evenings as best as I can for that proximity, for that
Yeah,
sensory route. And if you don't know about that route, you might be trying to balance that out in a very different way.
exactly. Exactly. So our 1-year-olds and
Mm-hmm.
sameness. Let's talk about
Sameness.
that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and Gordon Neufeld says that this emerges around 10 or 11 months, but I always
Mhm.
round up to the year to make it easy. And it really is the imitation age. And it's, the goal is for our babies to be able to hold on to us when apart. Well, in fact, adults too, we need to be able to hold on to our attachments when apart. And it very much is to be like and to imitate. And so I always think about, at this stage, as sleep cycles are starting to get a little bit longer, as language is developing, as we're often, for many babies, seeing some self settling in between sleep cycles. They're not always needing support for each one, whether you're bed sharing or not. Parents can see that that starts to stretch out a little bit. Um, and for me, I always focus on the routines and the rhythms at this age, that the shared routines that we can go through with our kids. We know the value of routines for sleep and rhythm and predictability, but through that root of sameness, we can look at how are we connecting through those routines, so that these routines and rituals that we do for bedtime start being a special way of connecting and being the same. So I think about, the ritual of brushing your baby's teeth, whatever teeth they have at that stage, and you're brushing your teeth too. There's a moment, there's a chance and an opportunity for connection there. the rituals that we start having around bedtimes too become quite special, which leads into some other roots down the road. But it's also, and I don't think it's coincidental, the age where babies are often getting attached to a stuffy or a blankie. And it's an interesting kind of way of approaching it, because we don't want that to circumvent the attachment that they have with an actual person. However, as babies grow and develop and mature, that becomes a way to hold on to you when you're absent. So it might be a fine line or semantics, I suppose, but when babies know, and it has your scent on it too, perhaps, by the way, so that first root, but when they have a blankie that is treasured by you, it's a way for them to hold on to you before they have a lot of language, or before a picture of you is going to be a good substitute for being able to bridge. Well, not substitute, but a way to bridge the separation, right?
Yeah.
And it really is the sameness as them forming a core identity that's based on the way that your family works. They want to be the same. They want to do the same things. The stage is always that stage where kiddos are wanting to do all the things that they're not quite capable of doing yet.
So true.
And so
true.
Yeah, right. Like, oh no, we're not quite ready for you to slice peppers with the sharp knife, but finding ways to be the same, do the same, and not because you're imitating them, but because the expectation at this root is your baby, when attached to you, is going to be copying you. And so we can model that.
I was about to say that.
Really well.
It's a great age for modeling.
Yes. So model, which is a great reminder for parents that are getting busy at this stage to honor their own sleep needs, because we can't possibly model effectively if we're not actually honoring our own sleep needs too, and our own need for rest, and that whole bit there too.
Absolutely. And then let's talk about our 2-year-olds.
Yeah. So belonging and loyalty. This is the mine stage, right? Everything is about mine, mine, mine. One of the principles that Gordon Neufeld talks about at this stage is to be for your baby, to be with them, not against them, to stand up for them, to be on their side. We talk so much about the terrible twos, and I think all they want to do is be understood, and they want you to have their back. And so often it becomes this power struggle. Gordon Neufeld talks about counter will. The more we push against, the more they push against us. Instead, we can come alongside and be on their team, like start on their team first. Even if we know for 2-year-olds, there are a lot of reasons to be frustrated. There are a lot of things that they cannot do. We at this stage can pay attention to the things that are really, really important that we don't want to negotiate on. But let's look at all the other ways that maybe we're making this harder than it needs to be, because we think we should have all these limits and rules. If we think of being on their side and supporting them that way, one of the principles, again, that Gordon Neufeld talks about is that parenting gets easier when there's attachment. So if we can find the ways to come alongside at age 2, then we're going to actually be making our job. And discipline, which is, we could have a whole discussion about what discipline means and doesn't mean, but it all becomes easier. Parenting becomes easier when we can come alongside. I think in terms of sleep, I always think about this being the stage where parents are tempted to, and I know I've done it too, because it's almost been scripted right into my DNA, to say, if you don't stay in bed, I'm leaving. And you think, oh my goodness, we go back to that idea of what is the most alarming thing we could ever put another human being through. And it is the threat of separation or loss.
Yes.
And so when we threaten to leave, we're saying, you have to measure up to belong. I will stay with you. I will be on your side if you stay in bed. Instead of understanding that strong need for attachment and belonging may mean that this is a stage where you're starting with a 2-year-old who has these verbal skills and so much they want to share, to slow down at night and really connect at a level that they're ready for, which tends to be getting more into the verbal connection and the storytelling and the recap of the day, and recapping the ways that you've connected during the day, or the things that have been part of their day. And so I really think this, avoiding that threat of separation at a time when they just want to belong, and they want to be so connected to you and loyal to you, but to have that wound of separation when we're threatening to leave, just really, if there's anything that's going to trigger that alarm for kids for that separation, it's the threat of being left behind.
Especially ahead of the natural separation of sleep, right? That's already a
Yes.
separation point.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. We haven't even talked about that. Yeah. That separate the sleep is probably the most frequent and most difficult separation that we expect our kids to endure on a regular basis. We have daycare as well, but sleep has been happening since the beginning, like since
Mm-hmm.
birth, that separation is there. Yeah. And I think we forget that because we want that separation. We want sleep. We want to,
Mm-hmm.
by age 2, we're really wanting a little bit more space than maybe our kids are ready for. But I think it's really about holding them close despite being separate, and again, staying below that radar of triggering that alarm, so
Yep.
that at this stage it's partly physical still. 2-year-olds are very physical, but it's also about that burgeoning uniqueness for them, right? 2-year-olds are showing us more and more of who they are and what they like and don't like, which for the first time is different than that first, the 1-year-olds who want to be the same. 2-year-olds are starting to show their differences from you. And that can feel vulnerable on its own. You think, am I the same? Do I belong? It's like you're unique and belong simultaneously. And that can be a hard thing to navigate in this culture of independence.
Well, and I think a lot of people are not ready for 2-year-olds like growing need for autonomy that is part
Mm.
of this phase a lot of the time. You mentioned like what rules are kind of the core to our family functioning and safety, right? And what can we kind of let go of to really come alongside them and be on the same team. And I often think about just think looking at developmentally that like a lot of what 2-year-olds are supposed to be doing is, exercising. They're learning of like what happens if I do this, right? And
Mm-hmm.
wanting a bit more control and a bit more agency in their world, and that's normal. And then we don't have to seek to like micromanage that as the parent,
Right.
especially if we've set up a space that we kind of know what our deal breakers are. We set up a safe environment as much as we can, and then we know how important that emotional, connection is. We can just make our lives a lot easier if we have a better idea of what's going on
Yeah.
broadly of where they're supposed to be.
Well, and I feel as you're talking, I'm picturing this push and pull for 2-year-olds, right? They so want to do it
Yes.
all themselves, and they still have this high level for reconnection or connection or
Yes.
closeness. And it's almost like this. I always picture maple syrup yolks. I don't know if anyone's done any of the sugar bush tours where you put a yolk on your shoulders and there's a bucket on either end, and you need those buckets to be balanced. And I always picture with 2-year-olds, they have this independence bucket that they're driven to fill, but to balance it out, they have the connection bucket that needs to
Mhm.
be filled as well every day. And it really is this push and pull, and you can see it in 2-year-olds, this
Mhm.
grappling of like wanting to do it but wanting to be with at the same time. And I can't imagine how, like, we can't remember feeling that way, but I imagine that every 2-year-old goes through that really challenging, I want to do it myself, and the dot dot dot, I still need you, I still need to be close, I want you to do it with me or for me, or to be with me when I'm doing this,
Yeah,
which
two is
includes falling asleep, right?
uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah, it is. And grabbing for that connection if they didn't have enough of it. And
Mm-hmm.
also pushing for that autonomy and independence if they didn't have enough of it. I feel like
Yeah.
so much of the work I do with 2-year-olds when we're having bedtime issues is around, I mean, so many pieces, but two big pieces are often like, are you connecting enough leading into bedtime, but also giving them more choices and autonomy throughout the day when you can so that it doesn't all explode out,
Yeah.
in the evening right
Yeah.
before bed.
Yeah, because we may be talking about sleep, but sleep is just the end of the day of a whole bunch of things that are happening. And this is often the stage when and I imagine that you've had this layers up with what you've just said about working with families, that this is when life has all gotten up to speed. Things are moving pretty fast. You get really busy. Sometimes we're not even slowing down enough to like crouch down and connect with our kids when we can. We're just kind of
Mhm.
yelling and managing and, yelling from another room to try to
Across
get
the
this
house.
done. Yes. Yeah. It's like, wait a second, maybe we need to just slow this down. And the parents that have struggle with sleep, where I think this is part of the challenge, there's consistently, I won't say always, consistently some resistance to believing that connecting more when you are together before sleep time is going to help sleep. But the families that
So
have really
important.
taken that on board, it's almost like magic. Like,
Uh-huh.
oh, this really, what we do really does matter. And if the problem is sleep or bedtime, it doesn't mean that's where all the solutions are.
Yes. Oh my gosh. At every age, but so much in this phase.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Yes. I will fully admit I still have to remind myself not to like call to my kids from the
Me
other end of
too.
the house. And then I'm like, why are they not listening to me? And I'm like, oh my God, just go over, touch them on the arm. Blah. Like my oldest is 11, almost 12. And when he has a VR and I'm like, how to get his attention without actually just like yelling at him because he's got a
Yeah.
headset on. Like I can't actually get in his space or I might accidentally get like smacked because he's
Right.
like playing some tag game and his arms are flailing
And you
around.
really can't, when you've got those, you
Like,
can't hear. You can't hear
uh-huh.
anything.
I'm like, I
Um,
hate this thing.
well, and I find I'm an early riser in our house. And so, I could probably think of the way through to connect this with attachment. But by the time my kids get up, I have this list of 10 things I've been waiting to like tell that, like, it's usually like demands, like, clean this up. And I noticed this was here and you've got to make your lunch. And they're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. And I'm like, oh, yeah. I forgot. I've been already up for 3 hours. So I'm like past the warm up stage. I'm ready to go. I need to just slow down and think about connecting and attachment and making eye contact and smiling and asking whether they had any dreams last night or how did they sleep. Because we all need that time for connection. And that
I'm
connection does lead to better cooperation.
yeah, I might do that to my husband sometimes.
I'm up for so long. I'm like, it's like a car on the blocks with the wheels spinning, ready to have, ready to
Go, go,
really tear
go.
into the rubber. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Yes, absolutely. All right. Well, as we are wrapping up this conversation, because you know I could always talk to you forever.
Goes two ways, Kim.
Yeah. And I mean, I feel like this is a loaded question because I know there's tons on attachment we haven't covered, and we gave ourselves permission not to cover everything. But do you feel like there's any last point we should touch on as we wrap up this conversation?
I think when it comes to understanding this model for attachment, and I feel like for most people, this is the case. This isn't about what to do, it's about how to understand it so that the answer becomes so much more clear what to do for your baby and your child, and frankly, your relationships in general. And I think that can be super helpful because it allows us to move away from this tendency to be looking for a script, to be looking for that checkbox. Like, did I tick all the boxes and do all the right things? It's like, no, this is about understanding your baby, understanding you, and understanding the relationship. And then you come up with amazing things that no one could possibly have given you because you understand better what your baby needs. And that would be what comes up for me as being really important.
I love that. And I think that's a perfect place to end our conversation today. Heather, I'm going to put in the show notes where to find you. And I know you have a couple of really great blogs on attachment that I'm going to include as well. But do you want to shout anything out in particular here?
Yeah, I do also have a PDF that goes through those 6 roots of attachment. So you can find it from the blog. So if the blog is linked, then families can find that at the bottom. But there's also, if people are wanting to learn more about straight from Gordon Neufeld, what's happening with these stages or roots of attachment. He has a lovely, I think it's an hour and a half video online. So I'll share that link with you because it's a nice way of really recapping it. It's concise enough. An hour and a half is still a chunk of time.
Gordon Neufeld is not the most concise man.
No, he is brilliant.
Not. And I adore his work, and I could listen to him for hours and have listened to him for hours in his trainings, but it's not concise.
Yeah, relatively
for him concise.
It's not 6 hours, it's an hour and a half. It's a lovely overview. And then my blog it's more concise because I wasn't going to write that long a piece there. So I'll give you that link so you can include it because I think it's a wonderful resource.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Heather, for such a wonderful conversation as always.
Likewise, Kim, this was so fun. It's nice to go through, especially something that is the foundation of how I think about so much with parenting and sleep.
Thank you for joining me today. I hope this episode left you feeling more informed, confident, and encouraged on your sleep journey. And just a reminder before you go that nothing in this episode is individualized to your specific sleep situation, nor is it to be taken as medical advice. Take what resonates, ignore what doesn't, and check with your healthcare provider about any medical concerns. Take a moment to subscribe to this podcast so that you'll never miss an episode. And take a moment to rate, review, or share an episode you love on social media. All of that helps parents just like you find me, this podcast, and this gentle and responsive sleep information. I'll see you next time.